new brain cells. So now I know when you hear that, most people are absolutely flabbergasted that that is true. And if you followed me via my books or social media, you will probably notice that I make it as simple as possible. Firstly, because I'm not a neuroscientist, just by hobby, should I say. But secondly, because it is this simple, that your brain is a muscle. And if you use it, it will not atrophy. And so the point of this course for your children in the 60-day challenge is to make you aware that firing and wiring new brain cells together is possible. And not only is it possible, but if we harness the right time for your child's brain development, we can ensure that there's a minimal amount of neural pruning going on. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Neural pruning we've spoken about before, but if not, that is something where the brain as a muscle decides whether or not to keep the neurons. So if you are firing and wiring your brain cells together, that neural pathway will stay. However, the brain is a brilliant piece of technology because it realizes that things that aren't being used will then be discarded, and that is what neural pruning is. So the point of this is not only to clear your brain, but to make sure that your brain is ready to be able to enhance its growth through all the different pathways that can be accessed. Okay, so a lot of terminology, but now that we've got that boring stuff out of the way, we can dive into the meat of how we're going to detox your brain to ensure that they fire and wire together. In the last few videos, we've spoken about the brain development of children. And the reason why my success rate is so fantastic is really because it doesn't take a genius to realize that most of the exponential growth rate for the brain happens between 0 to 7. The disclaimer being that obviously at our stage in development here, neuroscience is constantly finding out new information. But for now, they say by the age of 3, 80% of the brain is formed. And by the age of 9, 98% of the brain is formed. And so every stage, there is a neural blossoming that happens. And this is why we get to see such great results for the children. So we want to make the brain as pure as possible, not having any stumbling blocks or side effects, so that the child can just simply grow and develop at the rapid rate that the brain is growing in. So when we talk about neurogenesis, now that I've given you the definition, I wanted to speak about what we've already covered, which is brain development. And the second thing is going to be learning and adaptability. It is documented neurologically in lots of the research journals that it is actually easier for a child to see that has been blind or deaf to be able to hear than it would be for an adult. And the reason for this is, another word, neuroplasticity. So the neuroplasticity of a child has two functions. The child has the neural pathways that are formed, but they are not as ingrained as the adults. So it is easier for a new neural pathway to form for the child. And as a result, the child then can function as a normal individual. So this is why, again, I can brag about my success rates, but it also is a neurological fact that the neuroplasticity of a child is way more inspired, should we say, or has been set up that way, so that it is, you know, a faster, more rapid growth period than for us adults. So the learning and adaptability are really easy. When we talk about adaptability, I'm talking about physical excellence. And I have students that were running 3 miles by the age of 22 months. So why do I do that? The exercise is superbly important for children because we are trying to pump as much oxygen to the brain to ensure that the pathways get set. And again, neurons that fire together wire together. Once they wire together, the brain then will not get rid of them through neural pruning. So we are taking a basic platform, giving it the pure fuel that it needs to run on, and then amping that up with the ability to know when the brain development stages happen before the neural pruning. A really interesting fact, though, to note is that none of us have been more brilliant than in utero. Unfortunately, as soon as that baby comes out, most of the pruning happens in your lifetime as you are birthed. The good news is that I am about to publish a course for in utero, and we will get into that too. So just as an aside, if you want to get into our private Facebook group, look up Build Your Brain and answer a few questions, and then you can start meeting the tribe. The online courses will happen at buildyourbrain.org. Okay, so let's go back to adaptability and learning. We've spoken about exercise to help in the physical excellence, firstly, but also secondly, to pump that oxygen to the brain. Now, if you have done any of my courses, again, we take in neurological fact and using it to our advantage. And that is that as soon as the physical exercise is done, that is when we dive the child into the alpha brainwave state. And again, the techniques and all of the tools that I use are all available on my website. So buildyourbrain.org, and you can learn about that via the course. Otherwise, my school is going to be opening this year, September 2025, and you can hit the comments below if you're interested in joining. Okay, so we've dealt with the definition of a neurogenesis, the brain development, the adaptability on the physical side, and then the learning potential. So again, 0 to 7, the next thing is their cognitive flexibility. So just the way American Journal of Pediatrics has spoken about the neuroplasticity of the brain for these children, to be able to physically see, hear, walk for maimed children. This can also be applied for cognitive abilities, because now at this stage, specifically from around 2 years of age, the child is learning to, I don't want to say multitask, because that in itself is a myth, but they are learning to separate their cognitive abilities so that they can switch from, you know, a concept of maybe their macro prehensible grasp to a peripheral vision. And the brain is learning to differentiate. That's why, you know, sometimes a child will trip or they'll fall down the stairs, because the visual, maybe not even the peripheral, it depends how they fall. If they're just falling off the first step, that's probably the peripheral vision that hasn't fully acclimatized. But the other way they could fall is if they walk down a step or two and then fall. We also might have issues with their balance and things like that. So it doesn't only have to be visual. So the brain is learning at this stage of their development now to separate out and to cognitively be flexible and move the different parts of the brain. So they're moving from the pons, which is behind here, to the stem of the brain, to the midbrain, and then finally we'll be moving up to the prefrontal cortex. And then, you know, the corpus callosum will then allow the left brain and right brain to talk together. And that is when you're finally at, like I said, around age 9, when you've got 98% of your brain already formed. The interesting thing about cognitive, once you start analyzing the cognitive ability, the next step to that would be the emotional regulation. And that is, again, you are now transcending up the brain. And the brain is, again, happy with the neurogenesis of the basic from breathing to walking to running. And a nice aside here would be just to realize that if your child has skipped any of those, the crawling or the creeping, those are definitely issues that will affect the not only the neuroplasticity of the brain, but the actual neurogenesis. So again, this is something I'm so happy to talk to you all about, because I have children, and I went through it with my children, where we literally repattern their brain through making them crawl again, or making them creep again, or making them do monkey bars. So drop a comment in the chat, and would be happy to speak to you about that. But the emotional regulation is really important. You've heard about the terrible twos. There's a reason for that, and that's because the child now is starting to develop the neural cortex. So you help through that as the parent, as the main caregiver, to be able to help them assimilate the emotions and the feelings, so that they're not having these meltdowns in the ponds of their brain. And this is why when we go into diet, we will show you how sugar or dopamine rush is going to send them into a downward spiral, and we're going to help them and help their brains actually self-regulate. Another one that I absolutely love, given that I used to be a polyglot, is language development. So we have just come through a horrendous time with COVID. And unfortunately, what has happened is children have only been able to see from the eyes down. So there's a lot of research coming out now about not only the emotional detachment, but also the language development, because the children weren't able to see the lips. Now, on a positive note, we're not in that anymore. And so the children can see our lips and see our facial expressions. I have a beautiful story about two deaf people that had a child that could hear. However, when this child needed a diaper change, it didn't scream like a normal child. In fact, it would just wince itself up and make facial expressions so that the deaf parents could see. So this is how brilliant children are, how they just automatically intuit their environment. And that was for an infant. So you can imagine by the time, that they have all these neurological developments from a cognitive standpoint, from a learning and adaptability, from neuroplasticity, how easy it is for them to function in the language development style. It has been proven that children under the age of 7, when learning from a person, learning a second language from a native speaker, will actually inherit that exact accent, which is really different from us adults, because even though I loved languages, I could hear my accent coming through. And actually what I did with my children was every 6 months, I would chop and change teachers. So they would just learn a new language, not so that they'd be proficient in the language, but so that they would be proficient in the actual accents. So that's something to take into account. And also we do teach different languages. So just a freebie, throwing it out there if you want to just fire and wire their brains together. And then the final point of this is just what I think is really the crux of the course, and why nothing out there has been as successful as this course, is because we take a basic neurological fact. Actually, we take two basic neurological facts. The first one being that the exponential growth rate happens from 0 to 7. And the second one is that your brain is a muscle. So we put these two together and we work them together, and we work them in a clear brain, and the neurogenesis, the development of the brain cells, has to come to fruition. I hope this has been able to summarize where we're going to go in the next 60 days, why it is so important, and how is coming up in the next episode. I'm going to show you how to do my favorite word that I'm branding, how to neurohack for your child. And as I always say, the byproduct of this neurohacking for your child is that you as the teacher get to learn how to do this too, get to exercise your brain, and will have results for it too. Okay, thank you for your time. I'm super excited to have you on this mission with us, and I will see you in the next video.